Renn here. I have a very special guest on the show today, and that is Mike Pence, former Vice President of the United States, former governor of the state of Indiana, former congressman from the state of Indiana. He is well known as a Christian man, a good husband and father, and someone who's been very involved with faith and public life over the course of his career. So I was delighted to have him on the show today to talk about his faith and how he protects his marriage and his encouragements to those who might be thinking about going into public life, but staying away because they think it might involve moral compromise. I hope you all enjoy our discussion. Vice President Pence, thank you for joining. It's an honor to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Aaron. Great to be with you. I appreciate your voice, and it's great to be with a fellow Hoosier online.
That's right. We're sort of neighbors in Carmel, I believe. So that's great. Although we don't live in the same part of the city, so I won't be popping over to ask for sugar or something. But it's great that you chose to live here.
Well, you'd be very welcome.
Everybody wants to talk about politics and things like that, and those are important things to talk about. But what I wanted to ask you about today was your faith and about some very successful things that you have done to have a great marriage and protect your marriage while participating in public life. So for those who don't know, how did you become a Christian?
I was blessed to really grow up in a small town in southern Indiana in a wonderful family, 3 brothers, 2 sisters. My dad was a small business owner, and we were, in every sense, a churched family. It was grace before dinner. It was church on Sunday morning. But to be honest with you, Aaron, by the time I got to high school, I started to kind of experience some success socially, class president, and had some success in various national competitions in oratory. And to be honest with you, I just lost interest in religion. It wasn't that I left the church of my youth. I just left faith. I describe myself as an atheist, an agnostic at best. But when I went off to college, I actually met some young people who started talking to me about having a personal relationship with God. And that phrase was foreign to me. I had grown up believing, as Christians around the world will celebrate this Holy Week, that Jesus died to save the world. I thought I was just part of it collectively. But when people started to speak to me about a personal decision for Christ and a personal relationship with God that Jesus made possible, I was intrigued, and I started to attend a fellowship group on campus at Hanover College in southern Indiana. And by the spring of 1978, I found myself, after a year of thinking and searching and many long late night conversations with fraternity brothers who had a strong, youthful Christian faith. I was at a Christian music festival, part of the early movement of contemporary Christian music that took place at Asbury College.
Was this Ichthus by any chance?
It was called Ichthus,
Yeah.
and I sat on a hillside as I shared in a Bible study with some friends this morning. I remember listening to the preaching, listening to the contemporary Christian music, which is still very important to me today. And it was in the midst of a light rain on a Saturday night. It was like I heard the words for the first time, that God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whoever might believe in him might not perish but have everlasting life. And I remember I stood up at the invitation of the preacher, but not out of a sense, Aaron, that I'd become convinced of the historical accuracy or the intellectual foundation under Christianity. I literally, I rose up out of a deep and brokenhearted gratitude for what had been done for me on the cross. And I went down, I prayed a prayer and accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior on that night. And it has been a long time since, pressing up on 50 years. But that decision I still consider to be I hope and pray, the defining decision of my life.
Did this cause like a radical transformation in your life overnight, or was it more slow growth and maturing as a Christian?
No, I was, as I wrote in my autobiography a couple of years back, I said I was born again. I felt a newness, that the Bible tells us if anyone is in Christ is a new creation. I felt that in every sense, and I carried that exuberance of faith back with me from that weekend. I remember coming home and sitting my parents down and explaining to them that I'd found this personal faith in Christ. As I love my family, but let me just tell you that didn't go quite as well as I thought it was going to, Aaron. It was, but no, I was I had that experience of newness of life, and I know, in my wife's case, she's someone who was raised in a Christian family. She came to faith early in her life, and so she has a different experience. And in many ways, I can testify my wife's got a deeper faith than mine, but mine was minted in that decision. And this week in particular, I was just reflecting with some friends on on that moment in my life, and my hope to continue to reflect the truth of the gospel.
You mentioned your wife. When and how did you meet her?
Well, I was in law school in about 1983, and was renting a room in a little white house on Pennsylvania Street. Never imagining that someday I'd have a chance to work at a White House on another Pennsylvania. But there was a Catholic church nearby, and I would wander down to it. And sitting on the back row, I looked up and saw this beautiful brunette playing guitar in the worship group at the church. And it would take a couple of times attending that church so that I figured out how to approach her. I walked up to her, introduced myself to her, and we've been married 40 years this summer.
I keep reading about how young people today aren't dating, they aren't getting married, and people should take a lesson from what you just said. Go to church, go up and introduce yourself, and it's not magic, it's not rocket science, people.
Yeah, it was no choice for me. I mean, I have to tell you that my wife, I have aged more than a few years in the last 40 years, and my wife is not. She is still the most compelling and inspiring person I've ever met. But I just remember that day. I had to speak to her. She would tell you that in that first encounter, Aaron, she wasn't quite as impressed with me. But she eventually came around. We dated about 9 months before we were engaged, married 9 months after that. And my late grandfather, after whom I was named, who was an Irish immigrant, gave me some advice one time when I was in college. You get to your senior year in college and your friends are all getting engaged, and I was dating a nice young lady, but I couldn't quite make a decision. And I remember my grandfather was literally in the hospital in the waning days of his life, Aaron. And I said, gosh, I said, Grandpa, you and Grandma were married for more than 50 years, and you still held hands and loved each other until she left us. I said, what? I said, how do you know when it's the right person? And my grandpa looked at me and he said, when you don't have to ask anybody's opinion. That's how it was with Karen Whitaker, and it's never changed.
Yeah, so you and Karen have been married coming right up on 40 years, I think. And every account that I've read, even in the hostile media, talks about how close you two are. Someone says I think one quote was, there's not a dime's worth of difference between them. And sustaining that for the long term is incredibly difficult, I know. How did you sustain such a close marriage for so long?
Well, I think, for me, it all begins with faith. it all begins with that old principle that when you make Christ the center of your home and of your marriage, it's like a triangle where if the closer each one of you get to God, the closer you are to each other. And I must tell you, one of the keys to our blessing at this stage in our marriage has been over the last several years, we've begun to have devotional time together. Just about every day is taking some time to pray. We're now grandparents. We have 4 grandchildren under the age of 4. We have 2 of our kids are military families. Our son's in the Marine Corps. Will deploy before too long, and our daughter's married to a Navy pilot who will deploy again later this year. And so taking time to pray together and to really be on a faith journey together has really been key to us from the very beginning. But I also think supporting one another. My wife spent 30 years in the classroom. Erin, she taught half that time in public school, elementary. She taught the other half in Christian school. In fact, Karen Pence was teaching art at a Christian school in suburban Washington, D.C. When I was serving as Vice President of the United States. It wasn't widely reported.
No, I didn't know that.
Sure, she commuted with a lot of company. Secret Service agents with sunglasses on, and she was the art teacher at a Christian school. So, but I've always known that in her heart of hearts, Karen is a teacher, and I've always done everything I could to be supportive of that and encouraging of that. And she's been the same with me, with my calling to public life and to public service and to be a voice for conservative values. And so a lot of that we talked about early on in our relationship, that what both of our aspirations were, and faith, and then being in many ways on a mutually supportive journey together has been a blessing.
You mentioned being vice president. When you became vice president, we began to hear a lot about something that became known as the Mike Pence Rule. What is that?
Well, when we entered public life, I was elected in the year 2000. But Erin, if people grab a copy of my autobiography, which I'm happy to
We'll put a link
mention
in the show notes so they can do that.
Good. Grab a copy of it. You'll find out it took me about 12 years to get to Congress. So we lost our first 2 races, learned a lot of lessons about not compartmentalizing our life, saying I kind of told myself that even though I'd come to Christ in college, that when I got in politics, I needed to get involved in the kind of negative personal attacks that defined politics then and now in so many ways. I got caught up in that, regretted that. And when we had the opportunity to run a decade later, we committed ourselves to campaigns that would be about ideas and not acrimony. And people that know me know I love a good debate. I love to talk about the things I believe in and challenge people in their views. But we were able to get 6 terms in the Congress, and then as governor and as vice president on that mission, on that message. I hope, however imperfectly, we try to live that out. But early on, to answer your question, we had a young family in the year 2000. Our kids were about 5, 6, and 7. And I knew that Washington, D.C. was not exactly a family-friendly place. And so I made a promise to my bride at that time. I said that I would not dine alone with a woman other than her, and that it actually got some coverage. It was first reported in the Hill magazine on Capitol Hill, profiling our family in 2001. Reported without controversy. It wasn't, I didn't think it was particularly earth-shaking. But after I became vice president, in a profile of my wife in the Washington Post, the reporter found that reference, and it made its way into the public domain. It got called the Mike Pence Rule, but honestly, our inspiration was Billy Graham. Billy Graham, who I still deeply admire, the late Reverend Graham, and am proud to count members of his family as personal friends. He had established the same rule in his ministry as he traveled the country and traveled the world. And for me, it was always just about making sure that we conducted ourselves in a way that would never reflect poorly, either on us, but also on the people that served us in various roles. And but I never imagined that it would be a source of controversy, which it was for a time until about the same time, Aaron, the Me Too movement erupted, and some tragic stories of CEOs and senior executives who had used their position of authority overtook that news, and it seemed like people stopped talking quite as much about the Pence Rule.
Yeah, there was a huge amount of press over this, and back in 2017, The Atlantic said it hurt women. Vox said it was discriminatory and illegal. The Guardian said you were a misogynist. Were you surprised by this reaction that just blew up?
I think I was, and I'll tell you an amusing story that I wrote about in my book. The morning that was all over the front page of the Washington Post, I walked into the Oval Office, and as vice president, it was never my objective to be the story. I was there to help the president be successful. And as an aside, the president and I had a great working relationship for 4.5 years. It didn't end the way I wanted it to, but I'm proud of that record, proud of the team that we had. But I remember walking into the Oval Office. He was surrounded by a few senior staff at the time, not knowing quite what the president's reaction would be to the story about me and my wife and my family. And I'll never forget, I was just a few steps into the Oval Office when the president looked around everyone in the room and said, after everything they've said about me, now they're attacking Mike Pence for being faithful to his wife. And everyone in the Oval Office burst into laughter, and I took a seat and knew that we were going to move past it. But look, I had grown accustomed to criticism for my values, for my stands, for life, for family, and so this didn't feel particularly new, but it was a bit of a surprise. A story that had been published a decade and a half earlier without controversy suddenly became a story. But look, I have to tell you, the one thing, Aaron, is I have lost count of the number of people who have approached me, both when I was vice president and the 4 years since I left office, and expressed some appreciation for having read about that issue, read about that family, and particularly moving to me when young couples will come up and talk to me about having been inspired by it. And that's been a real blessing to me, because I do believe that for all the challenges that our country faces, the strength of the family is the foundation of our national strength. I mean, I'd like to say strong families make strong communities make a strong nation. So if before I leave this earth, if Karen and I have ever been an inspiration to a single family, to put their marriage and their family first, that'll be something we cherish.
Yeah, is this a kind of a rule that you would advocate for others, or was this more like just personal to you? How do you think about that?
Well, for me, it's just simply it's just a promise I made to my wife, and I would never deign to try and tell others how to manage their marriages, but I did take note of the fact that a number of major corporations adopted a very similar rule in the wake of the Me Too movement that happened,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, the notion that that colleagues of the opposite sex would not be dining without another colleague present, would not be having meetings, and I really emphasize that this is, for me, this was always about protecting the reputation of my employees as much as it was about putting guardrails around our family. I wrote another book. It's probably a better book because I wrote it with my daughter Charlotte. It's entitled "Go Home for Dinner: How Faith Makes a Family and Family Makes a Life." And in that, we talk about kind of building levees around your family. So if this is a tool that's helpful to other families, that'd be a blessing to me. But I think at the end of the day that we are wise to create promises and create aspects of our family life that protect the reputation of everyone concerned.
In 1987, Colorado Senator Gary Hart was the leading contender to be the Democratic nominee for president the next year when it was reported, that there was an allegation made that he'd been having an affair. And this forced him to drop out of the race. And we've certainly come a long way since then. Sexual scandals today basically don't matter at all for the most part, unless there's some sort of sexual harassment, type element included in it. And, even maybe even not then in terms of really causing consequences. Is there any path back to a more moral public realm or a more moral politics? Or is this just the new normal we're going to have to deal with?
Well, I think back to a few years after that incident where President Bill Clinton engaged in really offensive and improper behavior with college interns working at the White House, and one in particular, and was ultimately acquitted from his impeachment in the Senate as another kind of key moment where, as a nation, we had a big debate in the 1990s. I used to have a radio show here in Indiana, Aaron, and during those years, and every single day, the question was, does character matter? And it feels in some respects, because of the challenges that we faced, I think, since 9/11, the advent of the war on terror, challenges in our economy and division in our politics, that we've all kind of collectively moved on to other topics. But I teach a class at Grove City College, and we were debating this and discussing this recently in one of my classes. And I have every confidence that the American people know that character matters. The American people live that out every day in their lives. And having men and women in public life, whatever your politics, whatever your policies, being people to keep their word is the essence, I think, of democratic institutions. You elect people because you agree with them or in concert with them, and then expect them to keep their word. I have every confidence that we'll, as we continue to see and strengthen families, as we continue to see what I perceive around the country to be a real revival of religious principle and interest in faith around the country, particularly in your generation and younger, Aaron. I have every confidence that we'll see and embrace and recognize, again, whatever the politics people are, that the character of leadership is essential to our form of government.
My last question. We need men of good character, women of good character to want to go into the political realm, into the public sphere. And yet it's a very vicious place. The media, will treat you horribly. And I think there's a perception that like the kinds of people we would want to go into these fields are avoiding them because part of it is they don't want to put their family through what they have to go through, particularly to serve at the higher levels, on the big stage like you were. What would you say to people who are hesitant to get into public life? And then for those who make that choice, how can they protect their family from the worst of this kind of toxic environment?
Well, the first thing I would say is that the future of the nation depends on men and women of integrity stepping forward into leadership roles, whether it be in local municipal government, state government, or the federal government at any level. Having people in elected and appointed positions who bring with them a character, and I think the kind of faith that would sustain them, whatever tradition they come out of, is enormously important. Again, at the class I teach, and it's at Grove City College, is a wonderful Christian college in Western Pennsylvania. And I travel there about once a month and do the rest of the courses like this online. And my students would tell you that I begin each semester by saying, if you only learn one thing from this class, it would be you don't have to choose between living out your Christian life and serving in public office. You can actually do both. I mean, when you talked about my decision to become a Christian back in 1978, one of my first thoughts, because I'd been interested in politics since I was a little boy in Columbus, Indiana. I was inspired by President John F. Kennedy, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., others. That's why I started in politics as a Democrat, actually. These were the heroes of my youth. But when I came to Christ, I thought, you know what? I can either live out this newfound faith, or I can go into politics. But I obviously can't do both. And through some hard lessons along the way that I try and be candid with people about, I hope the latter part of my life has been emblematic that you can do both. In fact, that second book I mentioned with my daughter came from the way I used to answer members of Congress who used to ask my advice about what to do on a tough vote. And I'd say, just vote right and go home for dinner. Just keep your word to the people that elected you, and then keep your family first, keep your marriage first, and God will do the rest. He'll lead you along the way. But you have to, if you're in public life, you've got to make those choices from time to time. Turn aside from the social scene or the political scene and make your family the priority. But I'm absolutely convinced that Christians can not only survive in public life, you can thrive, but you have to make decisions along the way that really put your faith, your witness. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to that oath of office that we take, that to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, Aaron. And the Bible says in Psalm 15, he keeps his oath even when it hurts. And as recent history records, I know something about that. But for me, I hope that too is an example of what we just need: men and women in public life who will keep their word. And I want to give a word of encouragement to any one of the believers that enjoys your work, Life in a Negative World, your wonderful book, or enjoys this podcast, to be encouraged, step forward. The nation needs you, and God will never leave you or forsake you if you step out and stand for truth in the public square.
Well, you heard it, everyone. So you should take that very seriously. My guest today has been Vice President Mike Pence. I'm putting links to both of his books in the show notes that we talked about today. You can be sure to pick those up off Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. Vice President Pence, thank you so much for joining me. It's a great honor.
Thank you, Aaron. Good to be with you.